I'd like to call to order the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education. It is March 15th, 2022, and we're meeting in a blended format with some of us in person at Casco Bay High School and others joining us via Zoom. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo.
Présente.
Mr. Burke.
Here.
Ms. Russell-Better.
Here.
Ms. Biliou.
Here.
Mr. Youssef. Here. Ms. Aslami. Mr. McLaughlin. Here. Mr. Alzamili. Ms. Santiago.
Here.
Ms. Diu.
Here.
And Chair Figdor.
Here. I want to invite you now to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand. The Wulas Ta'egig, or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or people of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. All right, well, we are going to start, as is customary, with public comment. So this is public comment on issues that are not on our agenda tonight, meaning specifically issues we are not voting on tonight. We're not actually voting on anything. So any substantive matters, we will vote on minutes and things of that sort. So if you would like to address the board, you have 3 minutes. Please start by identifying yourself. Tell us your name and where you live. Again, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. And please indicate that you would like to address the board by using your the raise your hand feature in Zoom. All right. Is there any public comment? I see George Rowe. George, go ahead. You have 3 minutes. Sorry, George. One of us needs to find you. Okay.
I have been found.
There you go. You're set now.
Okay. George Rowe. I live on Hanover Street. And the two issues I wanted to address the board about this evening, we're now officially 2 years into the hardcore pandemic, and I'm a neighbor of the school department headquarters in Bayside. Just for a refresher, the school department owns the building on the corner of Alder and Cumberland. And there's 3 sides to that building. And then, of course, they also own the parking lot, which is next to Dyer's at 33 Portland Street, which basically covers almost the entire block between Hanover and Alder Street on the Portland Street side. And I know you guys have a lot on your plate. You always do. You always have, but I don't think it's too much to ask that you, at this point, I've kind of left you alone for a couple of years about this, but, to a passerby, the school department headquarters looks pretty sad, and the parking lot as well. And, the neighborhood has been I personally have been doing things to try and help you guys, but at some point, it does feel like we're missing the essential partner, which is the school department. A lot of the school leadership, including the school board members, live in some nice neighborhoods. I don't think any of you would tolerate a dilapidated, rundown institutional presence in your neighborhood without expecting some effort on the part of that institution to do its part. And so I am reaching out to remind you that this has been a longstanding issue, and I'm ready and willing to work with you and my neighbors so that you are meeting us at least halfway. And I'm more than happy. I think the superintendent has my email address. There's things we can do to work together, maybe even some kind of a springtime cleanup, maybe even bringing some of the school board members out to, get their hands dirty, maybe a little bit themselves. And, this is the kind of collaboration and partnership that you guys talk about in all your other endeavors. And it's a small, I think, token that kind of, you're walking the talk in your actual place where you call home. I know a lot of school department employees do not like having to work out of Bayside. I'm sure they've been grateful, perhaps, that they've been able to do a lot of their work remotely the last 2 years. But this says a lot about Portland Public Schools. It is literally your front doorstep, and people go by, and the
George,
message you send
your
is
time is up.
important.
Would you like additional time?
I'll just wrap up with 30 seconds here.
Okay, go ahead, please.
So, I don't think I'm asking for the world here. And some of you who've been on the board longer than the pandemic are aware of this issue having come up in the past. So thank you. And hopefully you guys can reach out. And if I haven't heard anything, you'll probably be hearing from me again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. Appreciate your being here tonight and your comments. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address the board tonight? If so, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. And we're going to move right to the report of the chair. And tonight I have pretty brief comments. I wanted to, as we get ready to hear the superintendent's budget presentation tonight, I wanted to just encourage everyone, members of the community, families, staff, to be really engaged in this budget process. This is my 8th Portland Public School budget that I've been involved in some capacity, my 4th as a board member. And I know I've seen time and again that when there's involvement at every level, students, staff, community members, families, that we end up with a better process and a better budget. So I really encourage you to be involved. I want to be accessible to anyone. I'm very happy to answer questions, walk through issues, respond to feedback. So please seek me out. And this year, we are very lucky to have a new finance committee chair, that is board member Burke. And I know that he's also very eager to ensure that there's deep public engagement throughout this process. So I wanted to just walk through a couple of the key dates. As folks know, the process for considering our budget is very torturous. We start with the board consideration. After the board passes the budget, it goes to the city council, and then finally to the voters. So oftentimes it's hard to know how and when to be involved. And so I just wanted to walk through three of the 3 key dates where coming out and sharing your views and providing feedback would be particularly valuable. So the first is next Thursday, March 24th, and that is our first joint finance committee with the city. So the school board's finance committee and the city's finance committee will get together for the first time to talk about the budget. I believe that meeting starts at 5 p.m., but double check. The next is Tuesday, March 29th, and that is our public hearing before the full school board. And then finally on Monday, May 2nd, there's a public hearing before the full city council. So those dates again, March 24th is the first joint finance committee meeting of the school and the city. Tuesday, March 29th is the public hearing before the the full school board, and then May 2nd is the public hearing before the city council. And that is it for my comments tonight. So next we're going to turn to the report of the students. And tonight we are going to hear from Abdullah Alzamili of Portland High School. And Abdullah, you have the floor. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. Okay, so a successful winter sports season has concluded. We had sports such as wrestling, girls and boys basketball, cheerleading, skiing, and more, and they've all gone really well. We also had unified basketball, which wrapped up their awesome season last Friday. Course selection. In junior planning, we're exploring who we are. We're taking all these quizzes, and we're trying to figure out what works for us college-wise and career-wise. All students grades 9 through 11 have completed course selection the week after vacation. Along with course selection, 77 students have had virtual visits to paths, and 33 more are scheduled. Students are gearing up for the Seal of Biliteracy testing on Wednesday, the 16th at Deering, and Saturday, the 19th at Portland, and the SATs are on April 13th. This week, we'll have parent-teacher conferences. Band and chorus students are preparing for the all-city concert on Wednesday. For fundraising, the atrium by the cafeteria was filled with hearts for Valentine's Day by the freshmen. Sophomores have sold stickers, and the juniors sold chocolates. We've had multiple collaborations with different local restaurants, such as Bruno's and Brickyard Hollow and Chipotle. And our February raffle was successful, and many people are enjoying their prizes. We're looking forward to the warmer weather coming in spring.
Thank you so much for your report, Abdullah. Really appreciate that. Certainly a lot going on. Okay, with that, we are turning to the report of the superintendent, Superintendent Batana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congratulations, Mr. Alzamili, on your first report to the board. This has been a sad period for Portland Public Schools. During the past couple of weeks, we have lost several members of our educational family. Would like to extend my condolences to the family of longtime Lincoln Middle School and Portland High School science teacher Gabriel Walker. Mr. Walker retired from Portland Public Schools in 1994 after over 30 years of distinguished service to the district. I would also like to extend my condolences to the family of Olga Teddy Valencia, former teacher at Talbot Elementary. Teddy retired in 2018 after a multi-state career. She's one of the first people I met in Portland, and she lived up to her nickname of Mama Bear to all who knew her. My heart goes out especially to her children, Annie and David, who are an important part of our PPS family. Finally, condolences to the family, friends, and PPS colleagues of Kyra Sparta, a former speech therapist at Ocean Avenue School assigned to our beach program. Although Kyra left the district in 2019, she remained close to many of her friends and colleagues in Beach and at Ocean Avenue. Former Board of Education member Mark Balfons, who was nominated by Governor Mills to serve on the Maine State Board of Education, was confirmed last week by the Maine legislature. We're looking forward to having Mark's voice on the state board going forward. I attended the state board's meeting last week and was disappointed to not hear anything about next steps in the process for a new round of competition in the integrated consolidated 9 through 16 school construction program. I'll continue to monitor their activity and advocate for taking the necessary steps to make that a reality. I'm happy to report that the Charter Commission voted last week to endorse one of the board's recommendations, universal resident voting in municipal elections. I'm excited to continue to watch and support this provision of the new charter as it works its way through the charter process. At the last meeting, I discussed the plan to fully fund our capital improvement projects, our CIP requests, by changing our approved state revolving renovation fund bonding around. That avenue is not available to us due to the state rules that limit roof projects to structural repairs. I'm continuing to work with staff and interim city manager West to determine how we move forward, and I will continue to keep you posted. I am pleased to report that we were awarded a Rethinking Responsive Education Ventures, or REV, $250,000 grant from the DOE to support our outdoor learning initiatives, including curriculum development and permanent outdoor learning structures. I would like to express my admiration and gratitude to our outdoor learning coordinator, Katie West, and our STEM coordinator, Brooke Teller, for their leadership and vision in advancing this work. And I'm sure we'll hear more about this when we do the spring quarterly update from the foundation, but I do want to let everyone know that we have received $100,000 in funding from the Kellogg Foundation to allow us to begin filming the Wabanaki Studies educational video. This film will become one of the anchor texts for our Wabanaki Studies curriculum. Filming has begun, and we look forward to piloting aspects of it next school year. Congratulations and kudos to FPPS Executive Director Andy Weissman-Summers, Social Studies Coordinator Fiona Hopper, for their energy and commitment to overcoming the funding barriers to get this resource in place. Next, I would like to begin our regular update on how we're working to keep our schools open, safe, and our staff and students healthy. As we have been doing for the past year and a half now, we provide a comprehensive update on our school reopening plans at board meetings. Today is the 2-year anniversary. Today's the 2-year anniversary of our first school closure connected to the pandemic. We have collectively navigated 2 years of unprecedented fear, anguish, twists and turns, and ultimately a lot of learning. Yesterday, we entered a new phase in the pandemic. For the first time since we returned to school in September of 2020, masks were optional. That includes all indoor spaces, including our yellow school buses. Note that masks still must be worn on public transportation provided by Metro. So our high school students who take Metro to school are still having to mask for that portion of their day. This step was made possible by the improvement in case counts in the district and across the country, which, based on the guidance from the Maine CDC, Maine DOE, and our own medical teams, suggests that we can take this step at this time. It's important to remind ourselves that our adherence to mitigation measures over the past 2 years, including the large percentage of our staff and students who are vaccinated, along with our robust testing programs, contribute to making us feel safe enough to take this step. As you can see, I'm continuing to wear a mask, as I think is everybody else here. Being mask optional means that we can make informed choices in consultation with our families and medical providers as to what makes sense to each of us. I will continue to mask in indoor settings where I sit in close proximity to others for a prolonged period of time. We have provided staff with resources on how to help their students respect and honor others' decisions to wear or not wear a mask. I do want to point out this morning was my first time with our walking school bus students, and about a third of those kids asked for a mask, even when they were outdoors. So I think that's consistent with what we're seeing in most of our school settings. In order to make sure that students have access to quality masks, we have procured children's-sized KN95 masks that can be provided free of charge to any families requesting them. As the board knows, my initial instinct was to continue to require masks for a while longer. I'm fairly cautious by nature and have vivid recollections of some of the setbacks that we've experienced over the past 2 years, which frankly make me nervous about this move. But given the advice of public health experts who also have been cautious and deliberate throughout the pandemic, and the assent of our collective bargaining partners, and the challenge of remaining masked when we host students from schools throughout the region right here at PATHS on a daily basis, I decided last week to move forward with a mask optional direction. It's important to remember that we still have other mitigation measures that continue. Our pool testing program continues and will serve as one of the data points that we monitor on an ongoing basis, along with a color designation of Cumberland County on the US CDC dashboard to determine when we might need to increase our mitigation strategies, which could include returning to masking in some settings. I need to stress the importance of continuing to monitor ourselves for symptoms of COVID. Because symptomatic individuals will possibly be unmasked, it is all the more critical that you stay home if you have any COVID symptoms. Please inform our school nurses if you suspect you may have come down with COVID, and they will help you to understand the timing and options for testing and quarantine. Additionally, in partnership with Greater Portland Health, we are offering boosters in all 3 school clinics to any eligible student, and we are continuing the weekly COVID vaccination clinic at King Middle School. Because it's not feasible for us to do contact tracing, we will not be determining who are close contacts at school. We will inform individuals and families when there is a positive in their pool, and armed with that information and knowledge of their vaccination status and symptoms, individuals with their families will determine whether to quarantine in those cases. Of course, if symptoms develop, they will be expected to monitor and test and quarantine if positive. Our nurses are available to assist families and staff to sort through all of these decisions. Individuals needing to quarantine will continue to be required to do so for 5 days. If symptoms are resolving, they may return to work after 5 days, but must wear to work or school, that is, but must wear a mask for an additional 5 days. We will monitor and enforce this to the extent that we have the information to do so. Individuals living with someone who has COVID can continue to come to work or school if they are asymptomatic. CDC continues to recommend that these individuals wear a mask when indoors. Again, we will enforce this only to the extent that we have the information to do so. We've also removed group gathering size limitations consistent with public health guidance. We are in the process of getting our tents in place to enable more time for outdoor eating and learning, and we expect them all to be in place by the beginning of April. Next, I would like to review our key data points. As I mentioned earlier, we do not have specific thresholds at which point we would return to masking, but we will be monitoring our own in-school cases along with county and city level indicators to make those decisions. At this time, all of our indicators are trending in the right direction. So I'm going to start by updating you on our student attendance. So you have a picture here of what our attendance has been like since December of 2021, and then what it looks like currently. So you can see that, you know, from those low points at the beginning, we returned to school after the winter break, we have been holding steady with our attendance in the 80s for our high school students and 90s for our middle school and elementary schools. You also know that we've been tracking staff attendance. You see very much the same pattern here. Our percent absent has been from those very high points back in January, early February, where we were somewhere in the neighborhood of 13% at times. We are now steadily in the 6 to 8% range absences on a daily basis. And our COVID prevalence, you know that we track our, a couple of things. We trend how we look as a school district compared to the county. And we also track by homeroom and by grade level. So our first slide here is the grade level analysis. You can see we have very, very few cases at all. So in no case do we have more than two cases at any one grade level for the past week. You can see what our cases look like as a school district, as well as the cases at the county level. I think that number, I'm not sure that I can fully read it. It looks like it's just 12, and that doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. So it might be 120 something and just masked in some way. But you can see that, you know, the cases have been, you know, steadily low for both our situation as well as for the county. And then last but not least, we've been looking at our total student cases. So you can see what that distribution looked like with, 7 at the elementary, 2 at the high school level for a total of 9 cases. These are just 9 student cases for the last week. And then the pool testing, we hit a very comfortable low of 2% of our pools coming back positive. So a total of 6 pools, which you can obviously look at what it looked like back at the beginning of the surge. And we're obviously in a much, much better place than we were at that time. And then our last, but very important indicator is the number of pools that we have, the number of pools that had cases, the number of pools that had 2 or more cases, and that had 2 or more cases this past week, and a total of 5, combined between the 2, and were positive for 2 consecutive weeks. And, of those, how many are trending up? And you can see that there were none that satisfied that criteria. So again, just really good news on all those data points. And so that's all that we really have right now. So any questions?
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. That data is certainly reassuring. I think I saw Ms. Russell-Better's hand.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. I just had a quick question. I heard you say something about changing numbers for gatherings, but I didn't get, did you, I might have missed
We
this.
removed the gathering size limits. We were limited to 100
Yep.
In a setting. And so we've expanded that to whatever capacity of the venue is.
Okay, so for in any building now, an event could happen without the restrictions of numbers of people. Okay, and were there any other restrictions that have shifted? I mean, so like say there was an event, the public can come without masks, right? I'm just trying to wrap my head around if there's anything
So like,
else
for
different.
example, tomorrow, the all-city concert was something that we didn't have any families invited to, and now it's open.
Okay.
So we expect anybody that wants to come to that event tomorrow can do that.
Okay, great. And so masks are optional for guests as well. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Yes, Mr. McLaughlin.
I actually had a question about sports. My sport ended, I did indoor track, but for the future, do you think we'll have to wear masks while we do sports? And I volunteer for the middle school track meets, and we have to wear masks there. So will we have to continue wearing masks?
No, you will not.
Okay, thank you.
For the time being, obviously, in
Yeah.
time, if, the data were to require that we revisit that, we would revisit it. But at this time,
Yeah, I
no.
understand. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bondo.
Thank you. I have a quick question, 2 quick questions. The pool testing result, are we still getting those results after 24 hours or 48 hours?
Mostly, yes. I mean, there are occasions where it, takes 48 hours, but for the most part, and I believe, I haven't checked, but I believe Tina was going to join us. I don't know if she is here. She is here. Hello, Tina.
Yes. Hi. Yes, they have been coming back as early as 24 hours and mostly within 48 hours.
Oh, thank you, Stina. So the vaccination rate, I know now we are optional with the mask. So how are we doing with the vaccination rate with our staff and teacher from different buildings? Are we still steady on the same level than we had a couple months ago, or is really improving with the booster as well?
I think, I don't know, Barb, if you have that handy. I know that, we're over 90% in staff vaccinations. And, we have improved slightly. I don't think that there's a huge number. We still require our unvaccinated staff to test on a weekly basis.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Do you have that, Barb?
So our district staff vaccination rate is at 96.2.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 62 people who are unvaccinated.
Right.
And are you also looking for boosters? I can tell you all the
Yeah.
Barb has done an amazing job
Yeah,
of
thank you.
tracking these data, and it is not easy. So thank you, Barb,
So,
for work on
Yeah,
that.
just a clarification, Barb. On those 96, is all buildings combining or just the?
That's all buildings.
that's
It's all
the whole
buildings. So
district.
we are 96.2.
That's correct.
Perfect. Right. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'd love to hear the booster data.
Yeah, so as of March 1st, we had 986 people who had also had booster shots out of a total of 1,660 people that we're tracking. No. 66%.
66.
Thank you, Ms. Stoddard.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Barb.
I'm done.
Thanks, Ms. Bondo. I have a follow-up question just while we're on this. I know initially our intention was to require staff that are not vaccinated to wear masks. Did we end up moving forward with that?
No, we are still in conversations with our collective bargaining partners to make that happen. It is something that needs to be negotiated with our collective bargaining unit as part of impact bargaining.
And do you have a sense of the timeline for when that might be resolved?
I don't know, Erin, if you have anything that you want to add on that front. I know that we brought it up in our conversations, and that was one area that we did not reach agreement.
I don't have any, additional updates beyond that. We've obviously been dealing with some other, kind of bargaining issues with our collective bargaining partners. So we have not circled back to that issue with them.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the board? Board Member Burke, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just have one. Could you just speak to what the current practice is for distancing, particularly during meals?
We continue to say that to the extent possible that we would urge people to be distanced during meals. As I mentioned, we are in the process of installing our tents to allow people to eat outdoors whenever possible, but we've not had the capacity to enforce 6 feet. We've tried to keep 3 feet, and that's what we continue to try to do, but we've not changed that or increased it in any way.
Thank you, Board Member Burke. I have one follow-up question. Do we still have the financial incentive in place for staff to get boosters?
We do.
We do. So there's no end date on that.
As people get their boosters, they can show us the card. They show their immediate supervisor the card, and then they are eligible for the $100 incentive.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I do not see any other questions from the board. So we will move right into the report of the secretary, and we have 3 sets of meeting minutes to consider this week. So we're going to start with consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of February 15th, 2022. Is there a motion?
I move.
Ms. Bondo, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. Are there any questions on the motion? So specifically on the minutes from our February 15th meeting? Seeing none, is there any public comment? So this is public comment specifically on our meeting minutes from February 15th. Don't see any public comment on our meeting minutes. I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on our minutes from our February 15th, 2022 meeting? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support action to approve the meeting minutes of February 15th, 2022. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Yes.
Ms. Biliou?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili,
Yes.
Ms. Santiago,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the minutes are unanimously passed with the students voting with the majority. Next, we are on to consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of from our March 1st, 2022 meeting. Is there a motion? Mr. Youssef, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. Are there any questions on the motion? Questions on our meeting minutes from March 1st? Seeing none, let's move to public comment. Is there any public comment on our meeting minutes from our March 1st, 2022 meeting? I don't see any hands, so I'm going to close public comment and we'll move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on our meeting minutes from our March 1st, 2022 meeting? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve the meeting minutes of March 1st, 2022. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliou,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili,
Yes.
Ms. Santiago,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the meeting minutes from our March 1st, 2022 meeting are unanimously approved with the students voting with the majority. Next is consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of our March 8th, 2022 meeting. Is there a motion? Ms. Biliou, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, we'll move to public comment. Is there public comment on our meeting minutes from our meeting last week on March 8th? Don't see any hands, so I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on our meeting minutes from March 8th? I'll just mention to the students, if you were not in attendance at our meeting last week, you could feel free to vote, or you could also abstain, whatever is your preference. So I don't see any board discussion. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve the meeting minutes of our March 8th, 2022 meeting. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliou,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Abstain.
Mr. Alzamili,
Abstain.
Ms. Santiago,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Abstain.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the minutes are approved unanimously with one of our students voting yes and the three others abstaining. So now we're on to consent items. Mr. Superintendent, will you please speak to this item?
Yes, Madam Chair. Under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district as required by that policy. All of the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item. Our practice is for donors to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. And I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance. In this case, we have one this week for Talbot Community School received hats for distribution to children in need from Anita Chandelier. And thank you, Ms. Chandelier, for your generosity and support.
Thank you so much. So now we are on to our board focus. And tonight, our board focus is the superintendent's budget presentation. Mr. Superintendent, take it away. The moment we've all been waiting for, the big reveal.
Probably less of a reveal since we actually posted it on Board Docs last night. But so Ms. Winchenbach, our amazing executive director for budget and finance, is going to join me for this, my sixth budget as superintendent. I want to give my thanks to Kathy in particular, but to all of my cabinet and our school leaders, because a great deal of work went into getting this budget ready. It's always a lot of work, but I'm particularly proud that in dealing with this budget, we've done some structural things that I believe were overdue and will serve us well in the future as well. So very much grateful to Kathy and to our whole team for the work that went into this. So next slide, please. Our focus is on teaching and learning, and that's our theme for this year's budget. It's a theme that we will be coming back to throughout the presentation, and that's reflected in the way that we're approaching this year's budget. Next slide. A lot of animation on that slide. As we work to fulfill our Portland promise of ensuring that every child is prepared and empowered for the next step of their education as a result of their experiences in Portland Public Schools. Next slide. As you are all familiar with, these are our priorities for meeting that promise: strengthening Tier 1 instruction, creating safe and equitable schools, focusing on building our professional learning community, and managing our school operations effectively. These are described here as our 2021-2022 priorities, but obviously there's a great deal of work to be done under each of these priorities, as you know. And so these are not one and done kinds of things. Really, they are the ongoing focus of our work. And that's why they serve as the frame for this year's budget and our budget goals, which I will be talking about in a little bit. Let's spend a little bit of time understanding why we focused on these priorities. So you've seen this next slide before. It's familiar to all of you. It is a comparison of our performance and the gap between our students of color and our white students on the last time that the state provided a state comparison. And so this shows you that we have, that the state has a gap and we have a gap, and our gap is significantly higher. So that's something that is centers a lot of the work that we're doing. When we look at more current data, and so the next slide, we have a couple of slides that tell us basically the same story. We don't have state comparison data, but this is our NWEA data, the new state assessment that is administered to students in the elementary grades, and then also through middle school, and then to juniors and high school. And so this is the aggregate. And here you see for students who are identified as having disabilities, so students with IEPs, you can see the on the left-hand side is the students who are who do not have IEPs, and on the right-hand side, students with IEPs, red being the percentage that do not meet or exceed standards, and green being those who do. And you can see that there's a huge difference between the students who do not have disabilities and the students who are identified as needing special support for those disabilities. And, the top is English language arts, the bottom is mathematics. And you can see those gaps are, significant on both sides. Madam Chair.
May I just ask why in some cases the numbers in this slide, and I think a couple of the ones we'll see next, do not add up to 100?
I don't really know.
Okay.
I don't know if Gavin, if you know off the top of your head why that is. I actually.
Yes. Sorry about that. Someone pointed out the correction to me recently, and it looks like I did not fix it for the language arts one, but I will make sure to get those righted before next time we meet. But the counts look right. So yeah, that one not sped for language arts needs to be fixed.
Thanks, Kevin.
So the next slide shows you a similar story, but in this case is for our students who are identified as English language learners, with the left-hand column being students who are currently considered English language learners, and then, much less of a gap for those students who are former ELL students, so they've actually, they've transitioned from the program. And then finally on the right-hand side, students who were never classified as English language learners. So as you can see, that continues the story that we've seen. But we know that the priorities that we're focused on are the correct ones, because when you look at this more closely, we see that overall our focus on strengthening core instruction has a positive impact. So here's data that you've previously seen showing that over time we see progress in the middle grades, where we have been focusing on math instruction for a prolonged period of time. And so that's historical data on the NWEA, from 2015 to present. Next slide, please. We know that the pandemic has made it hard for us to focus on this work. And one of the reasons why we need to stay the course on these priorities, you can see that our chronic absenteeism rates have increased significantly over the past couple of years. Across the board, there's close to a 10 percentage point increase for most groups that we are looking at, as a result of the pandemic. Next slide, please. And we don't have state level comparisons for the data that we just showed you, but we know from past history that this is not a problem. Chronic absenteeism is not a problem that is unique to Portland. And prior to the pandemic, we actually fared well compared to some of our comparison districts and the state overall. So I don't know what the picture looks like for those other districts, but we saw earlier what our data looks like, and it is one of the reasons that we need to stay the course is we've just seen tremendous setbacks in chronic in attendance and chronic absenteeism, primarily as a result of the pandemic. So with respect to our second priority, which is on building safe and equitable schools, we've started to see the results of this work with a significant reduction in the number of suspensions and slightly less disproportionate outcomes in terms of who is subjected to those suspensions. So that's, again, showing that when we're able to focus on things, we are seeing some positive trends. And so a good reason for us to focus on, continuing to focus on teaching and learning. So those of you who have been looking at our budget work over time know that this is a long-term undertaking, and you can see how this work builds over the years. Next slide, please. You can see over the years how our work has continued to build. And next slide, was capped last year with a very significant set of investments to advance our equity work in the district. And next slide, please. It bears noting that these investments are largely in personnel and largely directly supporting the daily experience of our students, as you can see in this slide, showing the increase over the past 5 years in areas such as social workers, behavioral health supports, and supports for our multilingual students and families, and for early childhood education. Which brings me to our budget goals for this year, which are maintaining these investments and not sliding backwards, but focusing instead on execution, recognizing that this work, as I've said several times, takes time, and that with COVID, it's been a challenge to gain and maintain momentum. We're also focusing on deepening Tier 1 instruction and the structures that support safe and equitable schools. And we're trying to advance a modest number of New investments, generally those that have a non-general revenue fund source. And we'll be talking through some of those in the second part of our presentation. So we're going to soon transition. Well, now next slide, please. Yeah, we're going to transition into look at the budget specifics, and Kathy Winchenbach is going to walk you through most of these slides, but let me give you a quick overview of this. Next slide. So you can see that our budget is up by about $6 million. That represents a 5.1% increase over last year's budget. For reference, that's a little bit less than the increase that we proposed last year, which was a 5.5% increase in our expenditures. And this results in a school tax rate increase of just over 4%, which is very close to what it was last year. And while I recognize that this is a significant increase in the school budget this year, I do want to note that we've had, as a city, a 0% tax rate increase for the past 2 years. And I believe this budget proposal balances the needs of our students and staff with the challenges facing residents from all walks of life. The tax increase in this budget proposal comes in well below the consumer price index. So now I am going to ask Kathy to walk you through some of the other specifics in the budget.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Winchenbach, as Superintendent Potan just mentioned. Next slide, please. So this next slide shows three main components of expenditures and revenues, and we'll be talking more about these increases in later slides. But starting with budgeted expenditures, you can see that our salary and benefits increased $4.3 million or 4.3% over last year. Our debt service has increased $666,000 or 7% over last year, and our all other increased $1.5 million or 9.2%. Our revenues are shown on this slide is comprised of three components: a non-tax revenue, which is increased slightly by 1.6%, our use of fund balance, which is increasing by 1.2 million, and our property tax levy, which is expected to increase by 4.8 or 4.8% over last year. So the resulting increase in both the budgeted expenditures and the budgeted revenues is 5.1% that we saw on the first slide. So next slide, please. So the question being, what are the cost drivers in this budget? Salary and benefits, which we just mentioned, increased 4.2 million or 44.3% over FY22. Our debt service, which increased $666,000 or 7% over FY22, is due to the additional bond issuances for our three remaining BFOF, Building for Our Future, school projects. And we mentioned that would be for Longfellow, Presumpscot, and Reiki Elementary Schools. And then the last component, which is the larger piece, is contracted services, which increased 1.8 million or 19.9% of the non-salary and non-debt service component of this. And the areas there are also delineated in our budget book that was published. But briefly, the private transportation costs, out-of-district tuition, repairs and maintenance, rentals, liability insurance, and other services increased significantly. And the rentals include the charges for the city facilities usage, which are anticipated to increase due to the rising costs related to maintenance of these facilities. And other services include our software license renewals, which are now required to be reported under contracted services by the state. So these are some of the main areas of increase. Next slide, please. And this is the transitioning to revenue now. The revenue, this pie chart shows the breakdown of our revenue graphically. We can see that 78% of it is related to property taxes, 15% to our state EPS funding, and all other is 7%. So the next slide will show the revenue budget in greater detail. Thank you. So our property tax levy is increasing by the 4.8 million that we've referred to previously, reflecting the 4.8% increase. Our state subsidy, EPS subsidy, is reflecting an increase of 899,000. And this is due to our accounting for the debt service reserve as part of our fund balance, not budgeted FY22 revenue. We actually reported that we had a decrease in our state subsidy, which we have. But you may not remember from last year that the state notified us in July of FY22 that we would receive an additional 6.2% in subsidy, which is reflected in our amended budget. The board and council approved our using 1.3 million to place grant-funded custodian salary and benefits back on the local budget, 1.5 million to maintain the combined FY22 tax rate, and 3.4 million to set up a reserve for fund balance. So that reserve for debt service is not in the FY22 subsidy figure because of the way we're using the funds. So it looks like we have an increase. When we compare apples to apples for an analysis of the EPS subsidy, we're looking at the total subsidy calculation for Portland year over year, and that's where we see the decrease. All other is shown here as federal revenue, our local non-tax revenue, other state revenue that's non-EPS, and our use of fund balance. The federal revenue is reflecting the main care revenue for the BREEVE program that we don't anticipate receiving in FY23. It does include the federal program monies for food service, which are projected to be down slightly. Our local non-tax revenue is largely impacted by food service. So the federal government is currently subsidizing our school meals programs right now. So local meal revenue is down. And our other state revenue as it relates to food service, again, next year, the state is expecting to pay for what we're referring to as the parents' portion of meals. So projected state revenue is up significantly in that category. And then our use of fund balance, we're using more of our fund balance in FY23 to minimize the tax impact. And we have a separate slide to detail those, to discuss those details. So next slide, please. So this slide shows the use of the fund balance in greater detail and by fund. The superintendent's recommended budget is planning to use $1 million of our unassigned fund balance or reserves to reduce the amount of property taxes to be raised by the school department. And our CTE program receives a portion of the state subsidy specific to career and technical education each year. So any unspent funds accumulate in a reserve for this purpose, and we're proposing to use a portion of this restricted fund balance for CTE in FY23 in the amount of $177,173. And we'll review the specifics in a later slide on investments. And we mentioned the reserve for debt service earlier in the presentation. We'd like to use a quarter of that reserve in FY23. So next slide. Well, if you could go back one more slide, I'm sorry. Could you go back to the previous slide? So we're also showing the breakdown by fund this year. The general fund basically includes everything other than adult ed and food service. So the amount of fund balance that we use for adult ed and food service has historically been the amount that was needed to balance these budgets and minimize the tax impact whenever possible. So we're showing it by category and then by fund. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide shows the tax impact. So the school tax rate after revaluation was $6.77. And the new rate after revaluation is $7.05 for FY23, which shows a 28% increase or a 4.1% increase. And then for comparison to what we had published earlier when we were working on the FY22 budget, we showed the property tax valuation before revaluation in FY22 and what the school tax rate was at $12.99. So the property tax revenue could increase by $677,307 solely from the increase in the property valuation. So we're expecting it to go up $100 million. This means that we could increase our FY22 budget by $677,000 with no increase in the tax rate. But then thereafter, each additional budget increase of approximately $1 million results in a 1% tax rate increase or 7 cents. So the next slide shows how this translates for the taxpayer. So we know that the proposed budget would add 28 cents to the school portion of the tax rate for a total school tax rate of $7.05. And then for a home with a median assessed value of $365,000 in Portland, this would represent an annual increase in property taxes of about $102. And I believe that's the end of the financial piece. Thank you.
Great. We're going to next move into talking about the proposed investments and also some of the things that are not in the budget. So maybe before I do that, I'll just pause and see if you have any questions on what we've said to date.
Look to the board for questions. I do want to remind the board that this is just the overview and that we'll have many opportunities to dive into all of the details. But if you have high-level questions at this juncture, please go ahead.
Okay, and we will come back to questions at the end, particularly with an eye towards the beginning of the Finance Committee process on Thursday. So let's move on. So again, you know what our focus is for the budget, and here are our budget goals again. Maintaining our current investment levels, not sliding back, and advancing our core priorities. And I will talk in a little bit about the potential use of federal funds to some of the investments that we're not able to advance. So next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about how this budget is structured at a programmatic level. So first, we want to walk through the implementation of our staffing formula. I talked at the beginning about the work that we've been able to do this year that I think sets us up for continued rigor in our budget building. And one of those key steps is the establishment of staffing allocation formulas at all levels. We've had a staffing allocation formula for elementary for a good number of years, for the entire period that I've been here and before. So this is something that we normally do every year, and it's to basically look at our expected enrollment at each of our schools by grade level against the grade level, the grade level allocations that we have, which is 16 students per pre-kindergarten classroom, 20 per kindergarten classroom, 22 for grades 1 through 3, and 25 students for grades 4 through 5. So you can see the reductions that are brought on this year as a result of application of this formula. For those who remember last year, we did not implement our allocation formula because we wanted to just wait and see what it looked like when we opened school this year. And if we had all of our students return at the beginning of the school year. And so this looks like a fairly large number. It's more than what we've seen in the past, and it is largely caused by what has been a cumulative loss of over 4% of our student population over the last 3 years. And so that's the reason that you see this, this decrease. Next slide. You know, as I mentioned, one of the things that we've done this year is to actually build out staffing allocation formulas for the middle school and the high school. So it was helpful to have this formula, which you can see there is, you know, 4 FTE per team for each 100 students in a team, and then just basically assume a 25 students class max. And in doing that, it really trued up to the way that we were staffing our classrooms. You see a reduction at Moore Middle School, and that was an addition that we did last year to try a 2-person team. And, you know, the formula does not bear out the need for that. So we've removed that addition for this year. So net loss of 2 positions at the middle school level. And then at the high school, we, for the first time, have implemented a staffing allocation formula. And there you see what that allocation formula is, and you see what the results of this are. So the allocation formula is based on scheduling assumptions that you see listed there. And as a result of that, we reduced 9.5 positions at the high school level. I do want to point out that when we apply the formula at Casco Bay, we actually would have had a slight increase of 2 FTE, but Casco Bay is structured in a very efficient way. And so when we looked at that and in discussions with principal peers, we decided, just in the larger context of what we were trying to do with this budget, to not add those positions. There is a small investment that we will describe in one of the subsequent slides to increase the Make It Happen coordinator here at Casco Bay to be a full-time position from what it currently is. But that's the application of the staffing allocation model at the high school. And you probably recall that we had a presentation on all this a month ago here with the school board. So this is the summary of the implementation of those formulas, and you can see a total reduction of 19.5 classroom positions and a specials position at the middle school level. So a total reduction of 20.5 positions. And so now we're going to move to some of the new things that are in the budget. And the first one is directly related to what we just talked about, which is the reductions at the high school from the application of the formula. And so what we also talked about a month ago when we had the presentation on the high school allocation formula was this notion of implementing a equity enhancement. So basically a way to recognize that our schools have a large percentage of students who have special needs. So students who have IEPs, students who are identified as English language learners, students who are economically disadvantaged. And we wanted to create a form of recognizing the additional needs that brings with it. And the way that we did that in the high school equity enhancement, as you may recall, was to value each of those students as 1.2 instead of 1.0. So basically a 20% enhancement for students who are uniquely identified as one of those characteristics. And so with that, we reinstated 9 of the 9.5 positions that we had reduced at the high school level. And you see what that looks like in terms of the distribution. So it's 5 FTE at Deering, 4 at Portland High School, And, the net cost of that particular enhancement is still on the negative side, so still on the positive for the bottom line of the budget by about $25,000. The one thing that I want to say about that too is that this, this will give us an opportunity to ensure that those additional resources are targeted to supporting the specific needs of students that fit those characteristics. So it allows us to have a discussion with the school about how those resources are used to ensure that we are truly addressing equity, which is what drives those funds. I do also want to point out that we do not have any other fund source for the high schools to do this. At our elementary schools, we've traditionally directed our Title I resources to ensure this level of additional support for students who have special needs. And so, we don't have that at the high school level. So this is an opportunity for us to do that. We've also built in some additional resources to the middle schools historically in the way of some of their specials and some of the ways in which, the day is structured that allows for more time to focus on the special needs of students. So this is, sort of leveling our high schools with our elementary and middle schools. Next slide, please. One of the things that we are advancing in this budget is really increasing the number of librarians in our elementary schools. For those of you who remember some of the details about our budget from previous years, where we consistently have more staff in every category of a staff type than what the state says we should have. The only area where we consistently have fewer than what the state says we should have is in the librarian category. And so this really takes a step in that direction. But more importantly, this is part of our literacy efforts and really trying to use librarians as a resource to support our content literacy instruction. And so the way that we achieve this, which will allow us to have a full-time librarian at all of our elementary schools, except for Brezomscott and Longfellow, who will be sharing a librarian, which is still an increase over what they currently had. So all of our schools will have a full-time librarian with those exceptions, is by reducing the number of library ed techs that we have. And that nets out, again, this is based on, what we project as the average salary of the librarians that we would hire. And it could be a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on the years of experience and credentials and things along those lines, would be an impact of the budget on the budget of about $10,000. Next slide. I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about the high school increasing our Make It Happen coordinator here at Casco Bay from 0.75 to a full-time position, with an impact of about $8,500. Next, please. So this is the largest of the impacts on our total budget, and this is the establishment of a full-time position for our Wabanaki Studies coordinator, who's also our social studies teacher leader. And so that's been progressively gone from a 0.5 to a 0.8 to now becoming a full-time position. And you can see the costs associated with this. And then this other one is really important. Many of you remember that we moved some of our curriculum costs last year, particularly for IM, off of our general fund and moved it into ESSERF. And, this is bringing that back, plus moving some of the other things that we had labeled as one-time investments from federal funds, moving those onto the general fund budget where they belong for the long haul. And so this is to provide a number of curriculum and assessment programs and materials. Some of this will actually be reflected in the academics budget. Some of it will be actually reflected in the individual budgets for schools as we move forward with this. And so this aggregate total is about $320,000. Next slide. We are proposing to continue our pre-kindergarten expansion, but instead of doing the 2 sites that we had originally if you recall, we were looking to do over 5 years, 11 sites, with the last year being a single site. And instead we're doing the single site this year. And then that allows us to do 2 next year, that we also will have classrooms at Brezumscot and Reiki, which are 2 high needs areas where we'll be able to move those programs there. So this will be an actual partner site. So it will be one of our existing partners or a new partner yet to be determined. And you see what this actually looks like with the addition of a pre-kindergarten teacher and ed tech, which is standard, but also we're adding a 0.5 social worker that will be tasked with working across all of our partner sites. I think one of the things that we've seen over the course of this year is the need to have dedicated social worker working with those partner sites. We've sort of triaged that to the best of our ability by paying existing social workers to do some stipend work in supporting individual cases in those schools, but this gives us dedicated resources to be able to do that work on an ongoing basis. You can see the costs associated with this. Some of it is offset by what we project to receive in revenue from EPS in subsequent years from the tuition associated with the students that we add to the program. And then there's additional costs of the partnership MOU with our new partner, as well as some general some money for supplies to start up a new program and things along those lines. And you see what the total impact is on our budget, which we estimate to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000. Next, please. So when Kathy talked about some of the use of fund balance, she talked about using some of our existing fund balance that is restricted for CTE programs. This is the result of spending less on CTE programming than what we were actually getting in state funding as part of EPS. And so that money has accrued, and we're looking to use it over the next couple of years to support work that we have signaled and talked a lot about over the course of the year, which is really helping our Latinx students who, as you saw earlier, as we looked at chronic absenteeism data, have the highest chronic absenteeism data of any of our students. As we've engaged with the community and talked to students and families and the staff that support them, one of the things that we recognize is a valuable we hope a really valuable addition to the options for our Latinx students is increased access to the programming here at Portland Arts and Technology High School. And so this will allow us to have a full-time ELL teacher that works here at Paths, as well as 2 language access ed techs who will be able to work with the students directly in their programs. We've piloted that for the second half of the year with, some additional staff that we had, and it's going really well. And so we're trying to formalize that and make it a permanent thing. We're also adding a half-time administrative assistant here at Paths to accommodate the increased number of students, to also ensure that we have, day-long support and can stagger schedules to provide support to the on-site pre-kindergarten program that goes past the time that current administrative assistant staffing is on duty here at Paths. So because this is funded with the restricted fund balance, this does not have an impact on our budget. Well, it obviously will have a very significant impact on the students that benefit from it. Next, please. We will talk more about all of the things that were proposed for our student support services from the last presentation that you saw. But one of the things that we needed to move forward just to be able to meet the requirements of the new programming that we are subjected to is, the RISE program, which is Reaching Independence Through Support and Education. That is our name for support for students who have IEPs up to the age of 22, which was an extension over the last couple of years. And we currently have more students and require additional ongoing support. So this adds one educational technician position to provide that support. And next, Portland Adult Education approached us saying that they really needed to increase the number of full-time staff that are on site to be able to provide English as a second language support to adults. And so we actually reduced, it's roughly half and half. We reduced some of their hourly teacher costs, which this new teacher will be able to pick up. And then this gives them the added capacity of having a full-time contract teacher as opposed to a number of hourly staff to do this work. So you see there what the impact is on our budget. And next, we are proposing to increase compensation for the executive director of the Foundation for Portland Public Schools. As you know, the foundation has done a tremendous amount of work over the past couple of years. We are now already at this point in the year over $1 million foundation, which is a really significant increase from where it started a couple of years ago. And we did a compensation study that looked at the compensation level for our current, our current compensation level and what the market bears for a foundation that is over $1 million. And so we know we're bringing this to the average of the compensation level for $1 million foundations. And so that's what you see there. And I think that's it for the additions. This slide summarizes the total net impact of those investments. So all of the slides that you saw, the bottom line is about $430,000 that's added to the budget to the general fund budget to advance these initiatives. And again, the bulk of that is coming from the curriculum and assessment increase that we talked about. So next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that aren't included that we had identified as priority needs and that you've seen in some of our previous presentations. So I'll start, I talked about the fact that we're adding the RISE Ed Tech, but these are the other investments from our student supports team that we are not advancing. So we spent a considerable amount of time at the last meeting talking about the need for a team that would really prioritize consultation and intervention to reduce the number of referrals, to assist at the school level with some of the day-to-day needs that they identify. And so that's not in the budget. We also had a number of district program staffing increases that are not currently in the budget proposal. And this is a different thing at the bottom, the social work staffing increases. This is as we've applied our staffing allocation model to social work. We have discrepancy between what we, what our staffing model calls for and what we're able to provide. So row is not getting an additional social worker and Peaks Cliff could potentially benefit from having a 0.3 addition, and that's not in the budget. Next slide. Some of the LAU plan investments that did not make it into the budget are here. Some of them, those are the ones in the middle, the dual identified FTE, some additional support for pre-K, an additional FTE for our SLIFE, our high school program for students who have limited and interrupted formal education, as well as some of the language supports to expand both our supports in the Multilingual Multicultural Center, as well as some of the school-based supports that we're not able to put into this budget, and some of the non-personnel costs. There are a significant number of non-personnel investments that are in the budget as part of the increases in the department budget or reallocations, but we did not dedicate the money to the immersion and heritage language resources. We also have some world language needs that are identified that are not included. The addition of 1 FTE for middle school language immersion at Moore, and our Chinese language teacher. We're currently in the process of pursuing grant funding for that position and are very hopeful that we will be able to do that with a federal grant that we're in the process, that we're finalists for. So next slide. There are a couple other academic and miscellaneous school requests that are also not in the budget that we thought would be important to highlight. One is the 0.2 mobile makerspace teacher leader. You may recall that we received funding from the United Way to purchase a mobile makerspace, and so we do not currently have the staffing in place to actually operationalize that program. We also did some restructuring of contracts in academics and wanted to be able to add an ELA teacher leader, but that's not in the budget at this point. And we also had a number of garden teachers that were in our budget under federal funds this past year that are not in this year's budget. So I think those are the bulk of the things that are not included in the budget. And so next, we just want to talk a little bit about how we're going to leverage federal funding to be able to address some of those challenges. So next slide, please. Just next, please. So lagging process to use federal funds. The way that I'd like to approach this is once the proposed budget is through the board's budget process and onto the council, I think we should revisit that list of additional investments that did not get into this budget and consider whether we wanted to use any of our federal funding to support advancing some of that work. There's obviously concerns about doing that using federal funds in that there's a limited lifespan for those, but I also, know that we definitely need to do many of those things. And so it's something that I would like for us to engage as a board and staff in talking about the level of comfort that you might have with advancing some of those things. We would align and combine that with the participatory budgeting process that we've said we would do with some of those federal funds. So we'll have some ideas about that in the next couple of months. And so I think that's really it in terms of the content. I just want to talk a little bit about the process, which I think Chair Figdor did a great job in her remarks about talking about what are the sort of the key dates along the way. And so here you see, today's presentation followed by the school board's vote on April 5th. Then by May 16th is when the city council is supposed to be done with the budget. And obviously June 14th is the public referendum. And just to show a little bit more detail around what happens between now and the school board submitting the budget to the council, we have a board finance meeting on this Thursday, another one the following Monday. Then the first meeting, the first joint of two joint meetings with the city council's finance committee is happening on March 24th. We have a special meeting scheduled for 2 weeks from today, which will be the first read of this budget, and also a public hearing, and then ask the board to vote on it on April 5th so that we can bring it to the city council on April 11th. And I do want to recognize that the city council has been super flexible and moved its April meeting dates in order to be able to accommodate our schedule. So I want to recognize their partnership in this, in building out this schedule. And so last, we're going to open it up for your questions, but I just want to preview a little bit of what we have in mind for the Finance Committee meeting on Thursday is to drill down into the use of fund balance, show you what our fund balance picture looks like overall. I know the Finance Committee has seen this before. Just want to make sure that it is part of this more public process so that folks understand why we're able to do some of the things that we're proposing to do with fund balance. Then walk through the FTE analysis, the changes from FY22 to FY23, what that does in terms of elementary class size, which I know some board members have asked questions about along the way, and also to understand a little bit better what the equity enhancement is and how it works, to look in depth to our proposed investments, so that you can ask and we can answer any of the questions that we have, as well as quantify some of the costs that are associated with those things that I walked through that are not going to be in the budget. And then any other questions that you have today that we're not able to answer on the spot, we will, obviously bring those to the board meeting, to the Finance Committee meeting. And if you have any questions after you leave tonight that you want us to come prepared to the Finance Committee meeting on Thursday, we will be happy to do that. I do just want to mention to the new board members, that traditionally all of the board members engage at this level in the Finance Committee, because this is, your opportunity to really get deep into this most important of aspects of the work of the board, which is deciding how we allocate funding. And, so I really encourage everyone to be a part of this process, as well as Chair Figdor said, for our community to also be informed and engaged around the work of setting a budget. So any other questions that you have?
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. I guess before I look to the board, Mr. Superintendent, please don't walk away quite yet, because I have an initial question, which is that, do you want to take questions tonight, high level questions that have come up already?
Yeah, and definitely things that you want us to go deeper on at the Finance Committee meeting, things along those lines would be very welcome today.
Thank you. And it was helpful for you to preview what issues we're going to look already our plan to look in depth at Thursday's Finance Committee. So thank you for doing that. And I have heard a lot of sighs as particularly as you've been going through some of the priorities that I know the board had hoped to move forward with that aren't in the budget. And I just want to remind the board that this is the beginning of the process. And in addition to what the superintendent has proposed, we do have additional federal funding that, as the superintendent has talked about, we could decide to use to make some of those priorities possible. Okay, so I am looking at the board, and I'm going to start with Ms. Bondo.
Thank you, Superintendent, for the presentation. I just have three quick clarifications on the elementary librarian. So if we have some reduced costs here, so if I just want to make sure, so which elementary school won't be able to have any librarian?
So Longfellow and Presumpscot, which are our two smallest elementary schools on the mainland, they will share a 0.5 librarian, so half-time librarian at each of those buildings. And I don't know, Barb or Aaron, what is their current FTE?
So, good evening, directors. This is Assistant Superintendent Aaron Townsend. So the Longfellow and Presumpscot will share a librarian, as the superintendent said, and they will share a library ed tech. So we are retaining a library ed tech there to compensate for the days that the librarian won't be available. So, and it's actually Presumpscot is doubling the amount of library support. They're going from 0.2 to 0.4, as is Longfellow. They're going from 0.3 to 0.6. I'll also just note that Cliffs and Peaks will also double their librarian allocation from 0.1 to 0.2 in this proposal.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to be a following question. I just want to understand what's the 2.3. There will be some increase on the librarian for the Longfellow, or I didn't really quite understood what you just mentioned about the increase of 2.3 something about those are the staff as well, or?
Yeah, so walk through that again. Longfellow currently has 0.3.
Okay.
Right. And so this brings them to 0.5. So they go from basically a day and a half to 2.5 days.
Exactly. Okay.
And then at Presumpscot, they currently have 0.2. So that's 1 day.
Okay.
And they go to 0.5.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, 2.5 days. So basically one person, 2.5 days at one school, 2.5 days at the other school.
At the other school. Okay. Thank you so much. Making more sense to me. Thank you. So for my second one is for the Wabanaki Studies coordinators here. So we have a 0.2 FT here. So I'm just wonder, just to try to understand. So we have a Wabanaki study. I know for social studies, we have Africana study as well. So are we thinking to have each coordinator of those studies, or they will be able to coordinate everything else?
Yeah, so that position, if you look at the way it's described, and I know it's a mouthful, it's Wabanaki Studies Coordinator / Social Studies lead teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is Fiona Hopper, who many of you know. And Fiona right now is 4 days a week, and this would allow her to be 5 days a week. In her role, we want to highlight the fact that we are prioritizing the Wabanaki Studies work, and that's why that position actually has Wabanaki Studies built into its title, but it also has built into its title being the Social Studies Coordinator for the district, which also involves doing the African Studies work, as well as the vertical team that we have for, social studies, and I don't know, lots of other things that Fiona does.
Okay.
But this makes her full-time.
Okay, right. Okay. So for the Latinx and administrative support here in the PAP, so just try to understand the pipelines here. So I mean, those are full-time additions here. Then we try to recommend here. So they're gonna be they will be staying in PAF, but working with different high school, or because the way the pipeline is that the guidance office from a high school are directing student here.
Yes.
So I mean, if they just stay here, so we just don't know how many Latin students can be referred and coming to PAF.
Well, this is to provide the support so that we can refer more students than what we have been able to refer in the past, because we didn't have the dedicated ELL supports and the dedicated language support. So, to just describe how it's working right now is, we have an ESL teacher who's working directly with the content. So I can't remember what programs. I don't know, Aaron or Malia, if you know which program specifically. Yeah. So working directly with the instructors, maybe it's in the masonry program, I want to say, is that where they're working right now. And so the kids are actually coming and she's able to work directly with the teacher to build accommodations for the students to be able to accommodate for the language needs. And, having the ed tech support to actually be with the students to ensure that they're following all our safety protocols and things along those lines. And those staff will actually be here morning and afternoon. So we'll be able to get kids in both sessions into different programs. And so that's how that's designed.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, okay, so I think we have time for more questions. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Ms. Dia.
I have a couple of questions. I was just curious about so is that $100,000 position for the Wabanaki? Can you just explain if it's $20,000 for point 2, then that's over $100,000 for just one position.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. And then could you clarify, I think I heard that there was an increase in expenses due to paying the parent portion of school lunch. Did I hear that?
The state of Maine is covering the cost of going forward. This year, the federal government is paying for everybody to have free lunch.
Oh, okay.
Going forward, when we return to the way things were before the pandemic, when it was provided free only to students who qualified for free and reduced lunch, then when we return to the way things used to be, then the state will pick up the cost that would have normally be borne by families will be paid for by the state. And so that's what that increase in revenue is.
And then the last thing, in the ones that the Chapter 104 teacher with a 0.4 FTE, does that mean there won't be any Chapter 104?
No, I don't know if you recall, when Mr. Applegate presented on this, he talked about, and I don't remember the specifics, it's like 2.6 that we currently have, so this would bring it to a full 3.0 or something like that, or 2. Yeah, so it's to add that much FTE to our current staffing, which is in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 FTE.
Okay, I think that's it for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dia.
Get the details on that.
I do see that there's maybe she's put her hand down. There was a attendee who had her hand up, and just to reiterate that we're not taking public comment tonight, but we will take public comment at our Finance Committee next Monday, the 21st. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Superintendent, I just had a question. I wanted to make sure I understood on the slide that was talking about the staffing allocation formula and then the equity enhancement. So I believe that on the slide that you were explaining the result of using the equity enhancement and then the DHS and PHS staff positions. So those 9.5 positions are now not being taken out in the budget because of that. Is that correct?
A net reduction of 0.5.
Oh, net. Okay. So
it was
9 of that is not
reduced, 9 reinstated.
Great.
And so it's a 0.5 reduction at Deering.
Okay. Thank you. And then that doesn't affect, because that formula was only for high school, right? So that doesn't affect the middle school like that. I mean, I understood you explained the elementary process. So, okay. So that's just for the high school positions. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Don't see any other questions yet from the board, so I'm gonna, I just have a few myself, but I'll just start by saying thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent and Kathy and the whole team for the tremendous amount of work that I know went into putting together this budget and the presentation tonight. I am I was pretty worried about this budget, and I think it's turned out, while there's a lot that I want to do that we haven't done, it's we're in a much better place than I anticipated, given a number of factors, but including the economy and inflation. So I know this was not easy, and it took a lot of work to get here. It does every year, but I feel like amid the evolving pandemic and all of the change that we have, that in part because of the pandemic that we have weathered, that this was a particularly big effort. So just want to recognize that. And thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Kathy, I just want to specifically thank you. So I'm feeling really optimistic about where we are, rather than where I thought we'd be, which was facing just a really challenging budget. So thank you for getting us to this place. That said, there's still a lot that's not in here that I know we need to do for our students. So that we'll get to in coming meetings. I just had three very basic initial questions. Some were clarifications. I know in the staffing reduction at Moore, I know you, Mr. Superintendent, said that was a result of some co-teaching teams, and I was wondering if that were included, that was a special education and classroom teacher. No. Okay. And then back to Ms. Russell-Better's question on understanding the high school equity enhancement. And I know you've already previewed that we'll get into this at a more detailed level at the Finance Committee meeting on Thursday. But just to clarify it at this stage, we'll lose 9.5 high school teachers between Deering and Portland, and then add 9 back. But those are very likely different teachers.
Yeah, I'm gonna. I don't know, Aaron, if you're in a position to answer that right now, or if that's work that's still evolving.
Well, I would say it's definitely work that's still evolving. I would hesitate to say that it's to talk about it with respect to individuals. I think more what it provides the opportunity, as the superintendent said, is for the school teams to be able to identify ways to allocate their existing, ultimately their existing staffing, right? Because it's a net just 0.5 reduction at Deering, in ways that align with, the needs of students, and particularly the needs of the kind of subgroups of students that we've identified for the equity enhancement. So I would hesitate to identify it as changes in individuals, but more what it provides is a line of sight and, provides for the school to be able to think about, how they're allocating those resources in service of those students versus just expanding kind of the breadth of comprehensive high school offerings.
And that was the nature of my question, because I just want to, because the numbers, and once we apply the formula and then we apply the equity enhancement, we end up with about the same number. And I just want to ensure that the equity enhancement is actually it will be used to address equity needs, and this isn't just a mathematical exercise. Which I appreciate the mathematical exercise. I think it brings rigor to our budget. That being said, I want it to have a meaningful impact on the students' lives who we know need it the most.
And we do too. And I also do want to say that I obviously 100% agree with Assistant Superintendent Townsend, and also just urge you to think of this as an evolutionary process. So, this is not something that we have any previous experience with. I think we all understand the intent of it and want to make sure that that's how we're using those resources. And, we need to do that in collaboration with our school-based teams, as Aaron said, and we'll definitely do that. But that is definitely the intent.
Okay, thank you. And my last question for now is with respect to PAE and the addition of a English language teacher. I know PAE has long waiting lists I believe, for our English language classes. And I would like to be able to, not for tonight necessarily, but for the Finance Committee meetings to understand how we think that will affect the waiting list at PAE for English language instruction courses.
Yeah, definitely.
Ms. Dio.
I just have a quick question. I just thought of it. With the teachers, with the reduction of the teachers for PAE, the hourly teacher cost, is that overall in any particular area, like workforce, or is it?
I'm assuming that it's in ESOL, but I don't know that for a fact. We will definitely get the details, and Anita St. Ange can come to the Finance Committee meeting, or send staff to the Finance Committee meeting to help us understand that at that level of detail.
Thank you.
Good question. Yeah.
All right. Are there other questions for the board? Again,
Can I just do a couple of real quick clarifications, or sort of finishing with Ms. Theo's question earlier about the number of Chapter 104. There's 4.6, so that would have brought it to 5 full FTE. And then in terms of Ms. Bondo's question about the programs, currently are masonry, auto collision, and horticulture is where we have students, and eventually want to add carpentry to that as well.
Could you repeat those again, Mr. Superintendent?
Yeah, masonry, auto collision, and horticulture. And then in time, carpentry.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Youssef, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. One quick question, Superintendent. The participatory budget, can you go over the process?
I don't have the details, no. We currently have a group, I think I've spoken to the Finance Committee about this. We have Dr. Ahmed and his colleagues in the Superintendent training program that he's a part of have adopted that as their capstone project. So they're working and will be coming to us with some recommendations around how to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Okay, I think I don't see any other questions for now from the board. So I think that concludes this portion of the budget presentation. I just want to again say thank you so much to the superintendent and Kathy and the full team for all the work that's gone into this budget. And I look forward to the process of deliberating it and moving it forward. Okay, with that, we are moving to our first reads. This is new business consideration and action to refer the superintendent's FY23 budget to the Finance Committee. Is there, we make a motion on that? Yeah. Is there a motion?
I move.
Ms. Bondo, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Are there questions on the motion? So this is, again, simply the referral of the budget to the Finance Committee. Okay, I don't see any questions. Is there any public comment on the motion? This is just the referral of the budget to the Finance Committee. Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support referring the superintendent's FY23 budget to the Finance Committee. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Yes.
Ms. Biliou?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili? Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
And Chair Victor?
Yes. So the vote is unanimous, and with our students voting with the majority, and the budget is referred to the Finance Committee. Next, we have a first read of the District Advisory Building Committee's recommendation to reallocate project revenues to cost overruns. And that concludes our new business and actually our business for tonight. So perhaps I can just remind people again the upcoming meetings that we have with respect to the budget. So we are meeting next this Thursday, March 17th for our finance committee meeting. All of our finance committee meetings are on Zoom. And that is at 6 p.m. And then we meet the following Monday, this coming Monday, the 21st, also at 6 p.m. For our next finance committee meeting to consider the budget. And at that meeting on Monday, we will hold a public hearing. And then following that, next Thursday, the 24th, is our first joint finance committee meeting with the city. And that does indeed start at 5 p.m. And will be on Zoom. And after that meeting, our expectation is that the school finance committee will vote to recommend our budget to the school board. So that is it for tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation and attendance and work. Is there a motion to adjourn this business meeting? Ms. Biliu, seconded by Mr. Youssef. All in favor, just with a show of hands. It is unanimous, and we are adjourned at 7:55 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.